If you think the only thing lurking in the woods at night is your own imagination, you haven't heard what happens when the darkness starts watching you back. Tonight, every shadow hides a secret, and every campsite is just one heartbeat away from something you can't explain. These aren't just stories, they're warnings. Are you sure you're alone out there? I've always been the kind of dad who overthinks everything. I work in cybersecurity, so I'm accustomed to imagining worst-case scenarios, data breaches, identity theft, and the like. But when my daughter, Mia, turned 9, she asked for just one thing, a real camping trip. Just the two of us, no screens, no distractions. I couldn't say no. We picked a spot in the Green Mountains, a place I remembered from my own childhood. Not a campground, just a patch of forest off a winding trail, far enough from the road that you could hear the wind in the pines and nothing else. We hiked in late afternoon, Mia chattering about every mushroom and squirrel we passed. She carried her own little pack, proud of the granola bars and flashlight she'd packed herself. By the time we found a clearing, the sun was already dipping behind the ridge. We set up the tent together, her hands clumsy but determined, and hung our food bag high in a crooked maple. Dinner consisted of instant noodles and marshmallows, eaten cross-legged around a tiny fire. Mia asked if the stars would look different out here. I told her they'd look brighter, and when the sky finally went dark, she gasped at how many there were. We crawled into the tent, zipped our sleeping bags, and she asked if I'd tell her a scary story. I made up something silly about a raccoon who stole socks, and she giggled until she fell asleep, her hand curled around my wrist. I lay awake for a while, listening to the brook nearby, the crackle of the last embers, the deep, living quiet of the woods. I must have drifted off, because I woke to a strange stillness. The air was cold, the kind of cold that seeps through the tent walls and settles in your bones. I rolled over and glanced at my watch, 5:12 a.m. The sky was just starting to lighten, a pale blue behind the trees. That's when I saw him. A man is sitting on the log by our fire ring. He was older, maybe late 60s, with a thick gray beard and a battered old coat. He sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, staring at our tent. No backpack, no gear, not even a water bottle. Just him, as if he'd been waiting there all night. My heart hammered in my chest. I didn't want to wake Mia, but I couldn't look away. The man's eyes met mine through the thin tent fabric. He smiled, not wide, not threatening, just a small, knowing smile. I forced myself to speak. "Good morning," I said, my voice barely above a whisper.
You picked a good spot. Not many people come this far in.
His voice was rough, like gravel, but calm. I wanted to ask who he was, how he'd gotten here, and if he needed help, but something about the way he sat there, so still, made me hold my tongue. He looked past me, toward the back of the tent, then back at me.
You should always keep your head to the trail.
Then he stood, brushed off his coat, and walked into the trees. Not toward the trail, not toward the brook, just straight into the woods, vanishing between the trunks. I sat there, frozen, until the birds started calling. Mia woke up, rubbing her eyes, and asked if it was time for pancakes. She peeked out of the tent and frowned at the empty log.
Was someone here?
Just a hiker passing through, I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. She grinned.
Did he have a dog?
No, I said. Just a beard. We ate breakfast, packed up, and hiked out, but I kept glancing back at the log, at the place where the man had sat. When we got home, Mia told her mom we'd seen a forest wizard. I laughed, but I haven't stopped thinking about that morning. I never heard him approach. He left no tracks, no sign he'd ever been there. And now, every time I set up a tent, I make sure the door faces the trail, just in case someone's watching, waiting for the right moment to say hello. Don't get too comfortable, because what's coming next is even darker. Imagine being miles from help, surrounded by endless silence, and realizing you're not alone. The next story will drag you deeper into the unknown, where every shadow hides a secret, and escape isn't always an option. Ready to find out what's waiting in the darkness? Stay with me. The real terror is just beginning. I'd been camping since I was a kid, but this was the first time I'd ever tried it in the desert. My friend Lucas talked me into it, He'd read about a remote canyon in southern Utah, a place with no cell service, no crowds, just red rock and sky. We drove out in his old Subaru, bouncing down a washboard road for hours until the map turned to blank space. By the time we found a spot to pull over, the sun was already low, painting the cliffs gold and orange. We set up camp in a sandy hollow, pitched our tents side by side, and built a small fire with driftwood we'd scavenged from a dry creek bed. The silence out there was different, not peaceful, exactly, more like the world was holding its breath. We ate dinner, watched the stars come out, and told ourselves we'd hike to the Slot Canyon in the morning. The night was so clear you could see the Milky Way stretching from one horizon to the other. We stayed up late, talking about everything and nothing, until the fire burned down to embers and the cold started to creep in. I remember thinking how small we felt out there, just two dots in a sea of stone and sky. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps crunching in the sand. At first, I thought it was Lucas getting up to pee, but when I called his name, there was no answer. The footsteps kept moving, slow and steady, circling the tents. I unzipped my door just enough to peek out. The moon was bright, and I could see a figure standing at the edge of the firelight. Not Lucas. This person was tall, thin, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat that looked out of place in the desert. He just stood there, staring at our camp, not moving, not saying a word. I whispered Lucas's name again, louder this time. He unzipped his tent, poked his head out, and froze when he saw the figure. "Who's there?" he called. No answer. The man just kept staring, face hidden in shadow. Lucas grabbed his flashlight and shone it at the figure, but the beam seemed to get swallowed up in the darkness. That's when the man finally moved. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the scrub. We sat up the rest of the night, listening for footsteps, but the only sound was the wind scraping through the sage. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke again just before dawn. The fire was out, and the desert was cold and gray. I stepped outside, half expecting to see the figure still standing there, but the camp was empty. That's when I noticed the footprints, long, narrow, circling both our tents, then leading off into the rocks. No tire tracks, no sign of another car, nothing but those prints. Lucas tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably just a rancher or a lost hiker, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever, or whatever, stood at the edge of our fire wasn't lost at all. We packed up in silence, both of us glancing over our shoulders as we hiked back to the car. On the way out, we passed a weathered wooden sign, half buried in sand. It just said, "No camping beyond this point." We hadn't seen it on the way in. I haven't been back to the desert since. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see that figure standing in the moonlight, watching, waiting for something I hope I never understand. Some places, I think, are meant to be empty, and some silences are better left unbroken. Over the years, I've learned that camping alone is a different kind of quiet, not the hush of a house at night or the hum of a city after midnight, but a silence that feels alive. That September, I had a few days off between jobs, so I decided to head out to a state forest in northern Michigan. No agenda, just a tent, a book, and the kind of stillness you can't find anywhere else. I packed my usual gear, tent, sleeping pad, stove, the battered old lantern my dad gave me, and a new hatchet I'd picked up on sale. I double-checked the little things. Extra socks, water filter, the backup lighter, I always forget. I wasn't looking for adventure, just a break. I'd scouted a spot in the spring, a little clearing off a 2-track, maybe a mile from the main road. No picnic table, no fire ring, just a patch of flat ground and a view of the pines. I parked, killed the engine, and just sat for a minute, letting the quiet settle in. A squirrel chattered somewhere, but otherwise, it was just me and the trees. Setup was routine. Tent staked, rainfly tight, food bag hung high in a crooked birch. I set up my chair, tuned the radio until I found a scratchy oldie station, and let it play while I gathered wood. By the time the first stars came out, I had a small fire going and dinner sizzling in the pan. That first night is always the best. Everything's still clean. The air smells like pine and smoke, and the world feels simple. I leaned back, let the fire warm my feet, and watched the sky turn from blue to black. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have this place to myself. No cell service, no emails, no one expecting anything from me. Just the sound of the fire, the occasional pop of sap in the wood, and the distant call of an owl. I poured myself a little bourbon, the good stuff I save for nights like this, and let my mind wander. I thought about my dad, about the first time he took me camping, how he'd shown me how to tie a bear bag, how to find dry wood even after a rain. I missed him more than I expected. I must have dozed off in my chair, because the next thing I remember is the fire burned down to coals and the woods had gone even quieter. That's when I heard footsteps on the trail. Not running, not sneaking, just steady. A single headlamp bobbed between the trees, weaving closer. A man stepped into the firelight, maybe late 40s, with a faded ball cap and a camel jacket. He raised a hand in greeting. "Evening," he said. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here." I nodded, tried to sound casual. "Just me. You camping nearby?" He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just passing through. Mind if I warm up a minute?" I gestured to the fire. "Sure. Fire's free." He sat on a log, close enough that I could smell the sweat and wood smoke on his clothes. We made small talk, where we were from, how the fishing was, the usual. But every so often, I caught him glancing at my gear. Not curious, exactly. More like he was making a list. He asked about my lantern, said he used to have one just like it. He asked if I'd seen any bear sign, if I was worried about being out here alone. I told him I'd done this plenty of times, that I liked the solitude. He just nodded, staring into the fire. After a while, I excused myself to grab something from the tent. When I came back, my hatchet was gone. I checked the ground, the log, the edge of the firelight. Nothing. It had a bright red handle, hard to miss. "You lose something?" he asked, voice flat. "My hatchet," I said. "Must have dropped it." He shrugged, poked at the fire with a stick. "Didn't see it." I let it go, but my skin prickled. He stood up not long after, said he'd better keep moving. His headlamp bobbed away down the trail, and the woods felt heavier than before. I doused the fire, zipped up the tent, and told myself to sleep light. But sleep didn't come easy. Every sound outside made me flinch. The wind in the trees, the creak of a branch, the distant snap of a twig. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, the way he'd looked at my gear, the way he'd smiled without really smiling. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I kept my headlamp and my phone within reach, just in case. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, circling the tent. I held my breath, listening. Then, the zipper. My tent door slid open just a few inches, and I saw the glint of my own hatchet in the beam of a flashlight. The man's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the dark. "You should have kept a better eye on your things." I stayed perfectly still, pretending to be asleep, every muscle locked. He lingered at the opening, the hatchet blade catching the light, then pulled back. I heard him walk away, slow and steady, until the woods swallowed the sound. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I lay there, heart pounding, every muscle tense, waiting for the sound of footsteps to return. At one point, I thought I heard him talking to someone else, a low murmur just outside the tent. But when I strained to listen, it was gone. I kept checking the time on my phone, watching the minutes crawl by. At first light, I packed up as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the tent poles apart. When I hiked out, I found the hatchet stuck in a tree at the edge of the clearing, blade buried deep. No sign of the man, no footprints, nothing but the mark he'd left behind. I reported it to the ranger station, but all they said was, "You're not the first." I haven't camped alone since. And every time I see a red-handled hatchet, I remember the way it glinted in the dark, just inches from my face. Sometimes, I still dream about that night, the sound of the zipper, the whisper in the dark, The feeling of being watched by someone who knew exactly how alone I was. If these camping stories make you think twice about pitching your tent in the middle of nowhere, hit that like button, subscribe for more true horror, and let me know in the comments what you'd do if you saw a stranger at your campfire. And if you thought the woods were unsettling, wait until you hear what happens on the Appalachian Trail. Click now to watch 3 terrifying Appalachian Trail horror stories, because sometimes the scariest thing out there isn't the wildlife. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.